Hello everyone. What's up? Welcome to GMA24, Update News Channel. Hope you will enjoy our news video. Before we begins, hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Here's the news title. Nigel Farage will be praying that biggest risk doesn't become reality for reform. Reform UK's star continues to rise. But it could all go horribly wrong. Nigel Farage's star continues to rise with new opinion polls confirming a recent Sky YouGov poll, which had Reform UK ahead of the Tories. And Labour.a Techni UK poll for The Independent found that 1/3 of Tory voters are switching to Reform, with Reform now joint top with Labour on 25% versus 23% for the Conservatives. Another poll, this time by Find Out Now, had Reform on 29% versus 25% for Labour, and a mere 18% for the Tories. This comes as a split appeared to emerge in Tory ranks, with former leadership contender Robert Jenrick refusing to rule out a deal with Reform, something a spokesperson for Under Fire leader, Kemi Badenoch, did. Perhaps Farage's greatest risk now is not the cancelling of local elections. This may hurt Reform's local chances but gives Farage a chance to grab the limelight and shine a light on Labour failings. But the risk that Badenoch is imminently dumped as party leader. Not that Jenrick and co look like great alternatives, but right now, anything might be better than this. In the meantime, Reform UK is surging and, on YouGov numbers at least, would be the largest party in the Commons, likely governing as the senior partner in coalition with the Conservatives. But 2029, the almost certain time of the next election, is a long way from now, and much could change. Badenoch could be gone, the Tories could turn the tide, and even Labour could make a decent go of it. Heck, World War III could be underway. But, for now at least, Reform is rising, and its surge is biggest risk. Could Reform UK's rise collapse? Introduction. Nigel Farage has been at the heart of British political disruption for over 2 decades. As the leader of Reform UK, he now faces perhaps his biggest opportunity yet. The potential to reshape the British political landscape by overtaking the Conservative Party and positioning Reform as the dominant force on the right. However, with great opportunities come great risks. Despite Reform UK's rapid rise in the polls, its success is not guaranteed, and multiple threats could undermine its momentum. The meteoric rise of Reform. UK recent polling has shown an astonishing shift in voter sentiment. A Sky YouGov poll placed Reform UK ahead of both the Tories and Labour, and other surveys, such as those by Techni UK and Find Out Now, confirm this trend. According to these polls, a significant share of Conservative voters is defecting to Reform, pushing it into contention as a major political player. This rise can be attributed to several factors. Disillusionment with the Conservative Party. Under Rishi Sunak and now Kemi Badenoch, the Tories have struggled to maintain their traditional voter base, particularly on issues like immigration, economic growth, and cultural policies. Farage's personal brand. Farage has a unique ability to connect with voters who feel ignored by the political elite, particularly those frustrated with mass immigration, net zero policies, and economic stagnation. Reform's simple messaging. Unlike the major parties, which are mired in complex policy debates, Reform UK's message is clear. Control immigration, cut taxes, and challenge woke culture. The biggest risks facing Reform. UK. Despite this rapid ascent, there are significant challenges that could derail Reform's progress. The biggest risk to Farage and his party is not necessarily opposition from Labour or the Conservatives, but internal and structural threats that could cause Reform to implode before it reaches its peak. The leadership crisis in the Conservative Party. One of the most immediate risks to Reform UK is the potential for the Conservative Party to replace Kemi Badenoch with a more effective leader. Robert Jenrick and others have hinted at a possible realignment, including deals with Reform. If the Tories manage to find a charismatic, hard-right leader who can reclaim disillusioned voters, Reform could lose much of its momentum. Farage's own history of party instability, Farage's previous political projects, including UKIP and the Brexit Party, were marked by internal conflicts, leadership struggles, and strategic miscalculations. Reform UK, despite its current popularity, is still an organizationally fragile party. A lack of strong regional infrastructure and seasoned political operators could leave it vulnerable in a general election. The electoral system, the UK's MOG first past the post, FPTP electoral system poses a significant challenge for Reform UK. While polling at 25 to 30% nationally is impressive, it does not necessarily translate into seats. A fragmented right-wing vote could still allow Labour to dominate in key constituencies. Long-term sustainability. Reform UK is currently benefiting from protest votes against the Conservatives. However, sustaining this momentum over several years will be difficult, especially if Labour's governance proves to be more stable than expected. Without a clear long-term strategy, Reform risks becoming a temporary protest movement rather than a lasting political force. Potential political consequences. If Reform UK's rise continues, it could trigger major realignments in British politics. Here are some of the possible outcomes. The Conservative Party splits or shifts right if Reform continues to siphon off Conservative voters. The Tories may be forced to move further right, adopting many of Reform's policies to win back their base. This could either strengthen or fragment the party, depending on how it is handled. A Labour landslide. Ironically, the rise of Reform UK could benefit Labour more than anyone else. By splitting the right-wing vote, Reform makes it easier for Labour to win marginal seats, potentially leading to a Labour government with a significant majority. A long-term populist right-wing movement, if Reform can overcome its organizational weaknesses and electoral system barriers, it could become a permanent fixture in UK politics, much like right-wing populist movements in Europe. This would dramatically reshape the country's political landscape. Conclusion. Nigel Farage and Reform UK are currently experiencing an unprecedented rise, but the road ahead is fraught with risks. So what do you guys think about this update? Let me know in the comment below. If you like my video, please press like button and subscribe for more. Hope I'll see you reveals the way Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister in 2029. The Chancellor has set out how Labour will be ousted from office at the next election unless they get one major thing right. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has warned her party that Nigel Farage could be Britain's next Prime Minister if Labour fails to get one major thing right over the coming years. Speaking candidly at a live podcast recording last night, Ms. Reeves spelt out how Reform could sweep to power in 2029. The under-fire Chancellor said Reform is relying on Labour to make no improvements to the health service or cost of living. Delivering the major wake-up call to her Labour colleagues, she told comedian Matt Ford, "There's lots of strategies for beating Reform or beating the Tories, but in the end we have to deliver, haven't you? At the next election, if people still find it hard to get a doctor's appointment and they're no better off, they are going to kick us out, like they kicked the last lot out." She added that Labour have to show that we can be better, and that Nigel Farage will want to tell voters in 2029, things haven't got better, so give us a go. The second-in-command added, "We've got to show that people's lives are better after 5 years of a Labour government." Labour is under siege from Reform according to current polls, frequently placing in second place after the insurgent right-wing party. Reform has come first, or joint first in 4 of the last 5 polls, from a range of companies including YouGov, Opinium, and Find Out Now. All other polls suggest it is broadly a 3-way dead tie between Labour, Reform, and the Tories at the moment. Labour is currently launching a new campaign focusing on border security and migrant deportations in an attempt to counter the threat from Nigel Farage, including using Facebook ads with the same teal color used by his party. Meanwhile, the Tories are bickering about whether to go for an electoral pact with Reform, something Nigel Farage has coldly dismissed as a possibility. Ms. Reeves was speaking on the Political Party podcast in central London. She also insisted that a deal can be done with Donald Trump to get him to abandon plans to whack British steel exports with a 25% trade tariff. Speaking ahead of Sir Keir Starmer's planned first visit to the White House, Ms. Reeves insisted, "We have got a steel sector that's really important to our economy. About 10% of the steel we make in Britain gets exported to the US. That's an important market for us. We also import steel from the US as well. And as I said, we don't have a trade surplus with America. I strongly believe that a deal can be done," she said. "Unlike many other countries around the world, we don't run a trade surplus with the US. Donald Trump previously said, "Britain's trade deficit with the US is not as bad as the EU's, Mexico's, or Canada's." Rachel Reeves reveals how Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister in 2029. Introduction. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has issued a stark warning to her Labour colleagues. Unless the party successfully addresses key issues such as healthcare and the cost of living, Nigel Farage and Reform UK could seize power in the 2029 general election. Speaking candidly at a live podcast recording, she emphasized that Reform is counting on Labour's failure to deliver, positioning themselves as the alternative government. The political landscape, Labour, Reform, and the Tories' Labour currently faces a significant challenge from Reform UK, which has surged in the polls, frequently placing second and even tying for first place in some surveys. This political shift has created a dynamic in which Labour must not only maintain its support base, but also prove its ability to govern effectively. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party is internally divided on how to respond to Reform's rise. Some Tories advocate for an electoral pact with Nigel Farage's party, while others, including Farage himself, have dismissed this possibility outright. The core of Reeves's warning. Reeves's warning revolves around one fundamental point. Labour must demonstrate tangible improvements in key areas of public concern. If by 2029, voters still struggle to secure doctors' appointments and experience stagnant wages, Labour risks being ousted just as the Conservatives were in 2024. Farage's message to voters will be simple. Labour hasn't made things better. Give us a go. Healthcare. The National Health Service remains one of the most pressing concerns for British voters. The backlog of patients waiting for appointments, shortages of medical staff, and the strain on emergency services have left many disillusioned. Reeves stressed that unless Labour can demonstrate real progress in making healthcare more accessible, voters may seek alternatives. Cost of living rising inflation, unaffordable housing, and stagnant wages have compounded the difficulties facing everyday Britons. Labour's ability to alleviate these economic pressures will be a decisive factor in determining their political future. If voters do not feel financially better off under a Labour government, they may turn to Reform UK, which has positioned itself as a populist alternative promising economic revitalization. Immigration and Border Security Labour has launched a new campaign focusing on border security and migrant deportations in an attempt to counter Farage's hardline stance. By adopting similar messaging and even using the teal color associated with Reform UK in online advertisements, Labour is attempting to neutralize one of Farage's strongest political weapons. However, it remains to be seen whether this strategy will resonate with voters or merely validate Reform's talking points. The threat of reform. UK reform. UK, under Farage's leadership, has transformed from a fringe movement into a serious political contender. Its anti-establishment rhetoric and focus on national sovereignty have struck a chord with disaffected voters across the political spectrum. Reeves's warning highlights the possibility of a major political realignment, where Reform UK could become a dominant force in British politics. Farage's potential path to power for Farage to become Prime Minister in 2029, several conditions must be met. Labour fails to deliver. If Labour is unable to improve the NHS, economy, and public services, voters will seek alternatives. Tory collapse. Continued internal divisions and lack of a clear strategy could lead to the Conservative Party's decline, leaving Reform UK as the main right-wing alternative. Growing support base. If Reform continues to gain traction among traditional Conservative and disillusioned Labour voters, It could surpass both parties in the next election. Electoral strategy. Farage will need to capitalize on Labour's weaknesses, unify right-wing factions, and present a credible vision for governance. International relations and trade beyond domestic issues. Reeves also addressed concerns about trade relations, particularly with the United States. She expressed confidence that a deal could be struck with Donald Trump to prevent a 25% tariff on British steel exports. Given the importance of the steel industry to the UK economy, securing favorable trade terms will be crucial for Labour's economic strategy. Conclusion. Rachel Reeves's warning serves as a wake-up call for Labour. Failure to deliver on key promises could pave the way for Nigel Farage to become Prime Minister in 2029. With Reform UK surging in the polls and public dissatisfaction with the status quo growing, Labour must take decisive action to improve healthcare. So what do you guys think about this update? Let me know in the comment below. If you like my video, please press like button and subscribe for more. Hope I'll see you in next video.